In a Fox News interview earlier today, President Bush expressed disappointment over the Supreme Court decision giving Gitmo detainees the right to due process.
I am very disappointed by the decision of the Supreme Court, but nevertheless it's the law of the land. This is a far-reaching decision where, people taken off the battlefield, foreign fighters, are now given the same rights as American citizens, which is an extraordinary decision.
The question remains whether Bush will close the facility altogether, which currently holds 300 terror suspects. White House officials confirmed today that the president has made no decisions, but is deeply engaged in trying to find a solution. We continue now with Karl Rove. Karl, the Supreme Court has thrown an unholy mess onto the lapse of the administration with this decision. How do you read the state of play within the administration? Because apparently there's very intense debate about how to take this thing going forward.
Yeah. Well, look, you're right. This is a terrible decision by the Supreme Court, and I thought it was a little bit precipitous today when the media got all ginned up about the president wanting to close Gitmo. He literally said that at a G8 meeting a year ago, I believe it was, and signaled before that point that he'd like to find a way to close Gitmo. The question is, what do you do? One of the reasons that the administration did not close Gitmo earlier was because this court case was wending its way through the lower courts and onto the Supreme Court. And the question was, if you brought a enemy detainee, somebody you picked up in Afghanistan or Iraq or elsewhere around the world, and brought them to the U.S. shores, would they have habeas corpus rights? And by keeping them at Gitmo, not on U.S. soil, it was thought that we'd avoid that problem. But now the Supreme Court says no matter where you have them, they get the rights of, right to an attorney and right to habeas corpus, which is really extraordinary. I mean, for example, what happens? We have 260 people in Gitmo. What happens if a court says, well, you know what, we don't find that you've got an evidence, a certain amount of evidence that can guarantee that you can keep that person there? Well, what do we do? Do we release them?
It's a very real possibility that people haven't focused on, that we're going to bring them to the United States, and a judge could order some of these guys released into the United States.
And they could do this by simply saying, you know what, we're going to take the standard that we use in an American criminal court for that you would apply for a guy who was, say, picked up for burglary, and we're going to then apply that to a guy that we picked up with a weapon or an explosive device in Afghanistan or Iraq, and you got to prove to the same degree of evidence, in the same manner, the chain of custody of the evidence that that person is guilty. Now, we got plenty of judges, particularly on the West Coast and the Ninth Circuit, who'd be happy to fine for the detainee in that instance.
And it's just impossible to meet the evidentiary standards you would need in a civilian court on the battlefield. And another thing that's just terrible about this decision, Karl, besides the fact that it's not mandated by the Constitution, which is basically made up by those 5 justices, is this is going to make it really hard going forward to hold, for any length of time, people we capture on the battlefield in the war on terror.
Yeah, now remember, we've already gone through and tried to make a determination as to who these people are and do they represent a continuing danger. And we've made decisions about shipping some of these people back home. And we've had 37 of them come back and commit additional acts of terror or are suspected of committing acts of terror, including people who've left U.S. facility in Gitmo, gone home, and then turned themselves into suicide bombers.
This was a great decision that dates back to the Magna Carta, which is habeas corpus, and refers back to Yicko versus Hopkins, which ruled on the 14th Amendment a couple of hundred years ago, which means that the Constitution... Let me just get this out and I'll give you a chance to respond. The Constitution applies to persons, not just citizens, and that is in keeping with what the Constitution says.
Alan, never in the history of the United States in any conflict have we granted enemy combatants habeas corpus rights. We are now setting up so that if we are involved, can you imagine fighting World War II where we'd have to have an attorney present for every Nazi whom we had in an Arizona, Nevada, or Utah prison camp?
You can't just hold people without telling them right to an attorney and be charged with something. That's basic to our criminal justice system.
This is not criminal justice. This is a war. With all due respect,
when was war
these
declared?
people are people picked up on a battlefield.
Did Congress declare war?
Yes, the United States Congress authorized the use of force in October of 2002.
No, it said the president, once he used up all other options, would have the option. There was no declaration of war by the U.S. Congress.
With all due respect to Alan, read it. It authorized the use of force.
Was there a declaration of war by the U.S. Congress?
It is the authorization of the president to use military force. We're involved in a military conflict. We're involved in a military conflict.
But the U.S. Congress, which by the Constitution, you want to go by the Constitution, don't they get to declare war?
I go by the Constitution. I go by the Constitution, Alan. If you feel strongly about this, go get yourself an ACLU attorney
and
file a declaration in a court saying that this is an unconstitutional war. Spend the money. Fight it through the courts, and you will go nowhere.
Well, that may well be the case, except that if you're going to go by the Constitution, you got to go by the Constitution. I love these conservatives who love a strict constructionist.
Alan, it is the Constitution.
So habeas corpus is key to our
Constitution. Alan, this is the first time in the history of America in which enemy combatants have been granted the right of habeas corpus.
Do you think the president can the president by himself declare an individual enemy combatant? Isn't that the first time that one individual can determine anybody's an enemy combatant?
No, it isn't. In World War II and World War I, the President of the United States held people to be enemy combatants.
We had declarations of war.
We have had, Alan, this is an authorization of the use of force. You may not think that the Congress, by passing a resolution authorizing the use of force, really did authorize the use of force, but it did. And when you authorize the use of force, as we did in this instance, we're confronting enemies of the United States, combatants, and we ought to treat them as we have treated combatants and POWs in every other conflict.
Amazingly, Carl and I disagree, but I hope you have a very happy 4th of July.
You're still associates.
Have a great 4th.
No, I don't know if they'll still associate with me. All right, Carl, thanks very much.
Alan, I love you. I hate even when you're as wrong as you are tonight.
Thanks for your kind words.